Welcome, book lovers. We are back. Phil Svitek and myself. We are here for our Christmas episode, December month. We are reading Agatha Christie's Hercule Poirot's Christmas. This is our choice. This is my choice this month. And it's murder mystery fiction, Agatha Christie. We'll get all into it. Let's start with our quick thoughts. Phil, go ahead.
So I'm a big fan, right? I love murder mysteries. And then, obviously as I grew older, I got into Agatha Christie knowing that like, oh, she's the queen of all this and really kind of project that, progressed it forward. And yeah, I mean, there's so many books to explore. And this was an awesome one, right? And I think thematically it fits really well. Um, Although it, a little bit less Christmassy overall. It just
Right.
happens to sort of be on Christmas, but still part of the whole thematic of family and all that dynamic. And, yeah, I mean, I just have a huge love for it. And it's an easy read. I think some of the other ones, like whether Murder on the Orient Express or stuff like that, can be a little bit not headier, but like I don't know, they're certainly much longer than this one. This one was a quick, fun, easy breezy in and out. So yeah, it was overall really enjoyable.
Yeah, I mean, I've always been like growing up, I was always a fan of Sherlock Holmes, because my dad was obsessed with Sherlock Holmes, so I was naturally more exposed to him. But then as I got older and I was just reading more and appreciating Sherlock, but like appreciating Agatha Christie more growing up as well. And then I think probably within the last 20, 30 years, we've seen a lot of adaptations of her stories into mainstream media, movies like Murder on the Orient Express back in the 70s, and a new one just came out within the last few years, and Death on the Nile. I think those are probably the most common ones people can think of because those were the most mainstream of the last few decades. But also, there was TV series and stuff, the ABC Murders. So I got into Agatha Christie and more, I'd say more recently in my adult years, but she's great and she's very easy to read, like you said. This is just like a 1-2 day kind of story. It gets solved pretty quickly, and fortunately, like the setting is in the same area. It's like one location, one family, and then some, like by extension, which we'll get into. But I mean, it was easy. They're easy to process, and I think if you read so many of her, so like she definitely has a template that works for her, where it's usually her tropes are the like a big cast, a big ensemble. It could be like 1 out of 15 people usually around there. It could be anyone in the sea of all these people. So and that's the fun parts of her writing, because there are so many. It's just constantly a guessing game when everyone's in
I
the
mean, that's
same location.
the fun part is like, so she has those tropes, but it never gets repetitive because how she spins it within that is always very different. So what you might pick up in one story is not going to apply to another, right? So yes, the larger context of it remains the same, but the specificity under which she operates, that's the fun part. You never get the same trick twice there.
Right, and fortunately, her stories always happens at different locations. Like one is on a boat, one is on a train. This is in a house, So it really also depends on the environmental plays and the different factors that can go. Was it inside? Was it outside? Was it in this room or that room? So like it expands due to the location, and I think that's what makes each of her stories fresh, because the settings are always somewhat different. That like there are external factors that just separates each story, which I thoroughly enjoyed. This one takes place in, fortunately, one house with one family, so it's easy to follow along. And because I mean, yeah, there was some like maybe one setting outside, but basically it's all taking place in
It's
the
a
house.
big house, though. That
It
that's
is a big
the
house.
whole aspect of it is like, where is everybody? You got secret passages for like servants and this and that, and yeah, it was fun.
Right. And like when you have an old millionaire, like, and who has a lot of money, you can assume that he owns a big mansion house. So like it could be anywhere. So let's get into the family. We have the Lee family that was starting with the patriarch, Simeon Lee, the old millionaire, who basically he's just kind of a jerk. Not, and I shouldn't even say kinda. He is a jerk, but he gathers his all of his children together for Christmas. His four sons, all different personalities, which I enjoyed. So and then his daughter who actually died, but all of his inheritance would have went to the daughter, but because she's gone, it reverted back to the estates. What were your thoughts of the four different sons, and I guess you could say by extension the wives, but mostly the four different sons and the different personalities that Agatha Christie set aside for each one of them and interacted with each other?
Yeah, I really like the family dynamic. I mean, first off of um, the father, him, like I thought it was a fun sort of play on Ebenezer Scrooge, where like, he wanted to be away from it just kind of felt like a little bit of that nod to it. Not exactly, it's apples to oranges, but still it felt a little fun. And then the sons, what's awesome about it is each of them ultimately have a reaction to that family dynamic, right? And it feels very natural. So you have clashing viewpoints, but it's not forced. You understand where they're coming from, what led to them having the worldview that they do, and why they, love certain family members, and others, like quite literally, they're like, I want to kill you. So I thought that played well.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting how when I don't know about you, but when I first read it, like I felt like I was getting the opinions of Simeon Lee, not based on just reading what Simeon Lee was about, but based on what other people thought of him. So like their opinions really framed what I thought of the character, like of Simeon Lee. And I was like, I'm not sure if that's what I wanted, because I wanted to read Simeon Lee and then like make my judgments about that. But then like I first read the wife's opinions, like this wife didn't like it, the son didn't like the father, the wife was very distrustful of Simeon Lee. So like I was getting external, like a third party kind of opinion besides my own original set opinion about Simeon. But I think it's very interesting to tell, and I like the fact that she made, when I say she, Agatha Christie, made these four guys so similar yet so different. Different enough where like one is very respectful of Simeon, one is like big on money, one wants nothing to do with money, and then like I think this whole underlying thread of like where does who inherits all of Simeon Lee's money now that he's dead, and you just get these different opinions of like who really cares about their father and who really wants nothing to do with the family.
Well, I think, part of the fun in that viewpoint is, we're kind of like Hercule, right? So we do have more of a vantage point where we get moments where it's just them and not, Hercule kind of experiencing it. But one imagines like that's what he's having to do is piece together all these squabbling family members telling him truths, lies, half lies, whatever, and making his own assumptions about who, Simeon Lee, the murdered victim, ultimately was, right? And to that point, also, like, even Alfred, who seemingly loved his father, I mean, he, waited on him hand and foot, but in a certain way, a hatred within him grows of like, I mean, he's kind of doing it for the money, right? So it's not like he's this noble end all be all person anyway. And so you have to kind of weed through everyone's intentions of what they say, however much they say they may like this person. I mean, quite literally you had, one of the sons being like essentially accused, like, yeah, he would murder him. He wouldn't, but he could,
He
and it's like,
could.
what does that
He
mean?
thought about it.
Yeah, So it's like you have to really figure out where that fine line is of what do they mean when they say this.
Right. And I think it's just interesting to read all these different characters, all the sons, by extension their wives, and just as a reader we can make the general analysis that Simeon's not a great guy. He wasn't a great loving father. He had a lot of money. And he let his sons just go in the different directions that they want. Despite, but you
Women.
know, yeah, and he is the father, so like the sons always just had that level of respect for their father, whether they liked him or not. But I think it's the intentions behind, like, do we placate to their father just because at the end of the day they want his inheritance, or do they really just want nothing to do with him? And I thought that was, fun to read the different personalities, because that goes into the motivation, like, oh, it could be one person is trying to like pretend that they like it, but really it's just out for the money. So again, it goes with the constant guessing game within this family tribe of theirs. And then we have the footmen and the extra characters, that
The driver.
Simeon,
Yeah.
yeah, and the driver. And what did you think of? I guess you could call them like the B characters, by extension, who worked for Simeon, and their motivations and what their interactions were like with Simeon Lee.
I mean, it was interesting, right? Like, so it's set up in a way where seemingly they're the ones with the most motive, and they're outside the family, of course. So it's like, well, what are they? They have a lot to gain from this, but through the telling of it, it's kind of fairly early on made clear that none of them had anything to do with it. And of course, you're questioning, like, well, I know they have a perfect alibi, but women can lie, this and that. Are they in cahoots? And of course, it benefits the family to try to throw the scent off them, because it's like, well, it wasn't us. We're his family. So
Right.
you're playing with that dynamic, and I really, really enjoyed that aspect of it. And yeah, I mean, listen, ultimately, I don't think anyone walked away unscathed. Everyone was kind of like in that gray area of like, well, you didn't murder that guy, but you kind of sucked, you know?
Yeah, and it's always like, again, maybe it could be one of Agatha Christie tropes as well. If you've read enough of her books, it's just always like it's someone small but constantly in your face that you overlook them, but they've been there the entire time. And that's what the footman and the driver and like the help, so to speak. They're always there, but you don't think of them any more than the help. But you can say they're in the know more than the family would be, because they're constantly with Simeon Lee and they know more than they should, thanks to just that whole server client, you know confidentiality, NDAs, agreements, and stuff like that. So it's like they're always around and they know more, so they could also be like potential, just as equal of the people, what's the word, the culprit, so to speak, in that way too, because they are there in the same time, same location. And then we, of course, so let's lay the ground. So the whole mystery really starts with one night. We get the whole gathering. They're all just, it's the family reunion. A lot of emotions and tension, it spills out and whatnot. And then, of course, the murder happens, and there's a lot of blood in the room. The furniture is knocked over, and like the door was locked, and people are just like scrambling, don't know where they were, can't recall like exactly what room or who they were talking to during all this, and it just like starts the whole thing. What were your thoughts of the actual murder scene and just seeing everything, reading it for the first time, and how Agatha Christie like describes how it all went down?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of it has to do with because it's not just a normal, like, yes, families argue during Christmas and the holidays, right? But this isn't like National Lampoon's Christmas Vacation, where it's just, everyone gathered and, different politics. This was very much, the pot was stirred by Simeon. I mean, he gathered them and then he prodded them, right? So it's like, well, yeah, I could see someone very much being like, F you, old man, you're dead. So that's where kind of my mind went to initially. And yeah, I mean, you just have so many different moving pieces. And, we got quite a bit before the murder happened. I mean, the murder, not quite halfway through, but almost like halfway into the book is where it really happens. So there's a whole chunk where we don't get Hercule Poirot. We just get the family, scenes together, scenes alone, and all that. So that's kind of going through your mind. And, it's one of those things like I would love to revisit because, I would love to pick up on the clues of just in that moment as she's writing it in real time as it's happening, like what are the subtleties that we know of versus what they ultimately end up telling us, because we know that some of the things that they say to the police, I'll say for a larger extent of it, some of it is not quite the truth.
Right. And I think you could easily break down this book in, I guess you could say, three parts, where like, or three acts, where the first act is the main family getting all together, emotions are running wild, and there's the argument. And the second act is the murder happens, Hercule Poirot comes in, questions everybody, gets the recounts of everybody's witness, but that's the interesting part of all their testimonies and their statements, is that they're having a hard time remembering everything. They're unreliable witnesses. A lot of them are. So, and I think that's the fun part. We're like, oh right, I was talking to this person in this room at that time. That's right. And so you're like, so what do we believe anymore? So is that really true, or is that just based on your faulty memory? Because when things go down, everyone's kind of unreliable, and you're not going to really remember all the details exactly. And I think that's the fun part. And then the third act is, the whole wrapping up and exposition, I guess you can say. And I think that's why I like all of her books, because you can easily, break it up and understand how the story moves along. And then we get Poirot, our awesome Belgian detective that everybody loves, and he questions everybody, gets all the details, but it's interesting that you get everybody else with the lines are like, but the furniture is too heavy. You have to, like, someone has to manually flip that. It can't just be easily knocked over by something. And so, like, someone had to put the effort in. There's too much blood for this old man. To the point where there's too much blood, it looks staged, even though it looks real, but it looks too staged and too fake. So that questions a lot of things.
Yeah,
And then yes,
and
keep going.
just in general, right? Like also the red herrings, right? Like we as the reader, but also him as the detective have to weed through, like in particular, the phone calls that were being made. It was like, okay, well, what was the timing of the phone call? Okay, well, that doesn't, well, who were you really calling, right? And of course, the idea is like, he's not really hiding anything from the murder aspect. He's just embarrassed by what he was calling about in what regards, right? So it's like you've got these like little side mysteries that you got to figure out.
Right. And yeah, and it's stuff like that, because like when we realized what the phone calls were about, like updating the will and trying to get the inheritance, you're like, oh yeah, see, there's your motivation for why you would want your father to be dead. So like that just kind of like moves you up the list of being the culprit in that sense. So again, it's like multiple people were kind of out to get this guy, and not to say that he deserved it, but it seems like Simeon Lee kind of had it in for him. And like that's the fun part. I mean, it's not great that he was such a jerk, but you can tell why everyone disliked him. Be like, okay, man, you gots to go. Let's just get your money and move on. And then we have the introduction of Superintendent Sugden, who's also inserting himself into this crime scene, making his rounds and helping Poirot during all this. So, what did you think of Sugden and what he added to the story?
Well, it was interesting because it seemed like he was kind of going toe to toe with Perot, and then but his own like man Johnson, and even by Hercule's standard, he was very thorough, right? He was dotting the I's, crossing the T's, sort of thing, and following up on everything and being fairly timely about it. So I thought ultimately that that played really well because we know where it goes from there, sort of thing. But yeah, I enjoyed that sort of sprinkling of of everything to like throw me off the scent.
Right, and like that could kind of be the red herring in and of itself. We're like, well, he's a authority figure. He's the police. Of course, he didn't have anything to do with it, and he's asking all the right questions that the reader is still wondering ourselves. So you're like, okay, because and I think he asked enough questions and enough of the correct questions where it makes you think that he truly doesn't know what's going on because he's asking the questions. And getting all the answers that we're still interested in finding out. And I think it was pretty smart how he, like you see it in other movies and stories and TV shows where like when a crime happens and then the cop or the police or the authoritative figure inserts themselves in kind of like the false hero to kind of inflate their ego a bit. And quite honestly, didn't really see it. Again, another character who was right in front of our eyes the entire time and actually ended up being Harold Sugden. What did you think of that whole? I mean, I didn't really talk about it much, but the whole unraveling of the backstory of Sugden's family and how he actually has ties to the Simeon Lee and the whole Lee family.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. Like, so when you were talking about sort of, for lack of a better term, the help being sort of in the background, right? And really, they're the key to unraveling this whole mystery. And Perot knew that, and he always had this reverence for them. And through the reaction of, just opening the door for people, right? Anyone who came in, that was one of the big unlocks of the entire thing, because ultimately three people that looked quite similarly ended up coming, and that is what revealed to Perot of like, okay, they have a very similar look. Why? Oh, the mustache and the this and that, and he has his father's resemblance. And so I thought that all played really well, because it always, I knew a key component to it lied with, what the hell are these diamonds about? Who stole them? Why aren't they there? And of course, the easy thing was to point it at the granddaughter, which, by the way, kind of creepy that her own uncle is like, she's sexy. Like, I don't know. I was just, that part of the story, I was like, what the hell is going on? Why are they like Googling her? Like, that's, A, she's young, B, she's your family. Anyway.
Right. By extension, kind of. Yeah.
But anyway, yeah.
No, I agree with that. Yes.
Anyway, she's the easy suspect as far as the diamonds are concerned. And so, but I felt that was too easy and too on the nose and didn't quite trust it.
Right. And we see at the beginning of the film that, he's basically like brandishing his jewels in front of, the family or like a set couple. And so we're like, okay, one of the help knows about the diamonds. This couple knows about the diamonds, and now the diamonds are missing. So like we're automatically conditioned to think it has to be the people who actually know about the diamonds, because those who don't wouldn't make sense that they stole it. So again, with the whole guessing game, like, oh, it could only be these people. But like it seems like more people knew about the diamonds that they were letting on. And the difference between like having a hard time telling all these sons apart, especially when they're coming in rapid succession through the door. I definitely get that, because when you have people coming in and out, everyone just starts to look like each other.
They're all like,
that's what it seems like that was the problem.
Yeah, the woman, Mrs. Lee, and like like obviously when she's writing in third person, she'll give an attribution of who it is. But when there's, when Hercule's speaking with them, it's always Mrs. Lee, Mrs. Lee, Mrs. And you're like, oh, okay, wait. Who are we talking to?
Which Lee? There are so many wives now.
It's like everyone's named Lee, which makes sense, but damn.
Right. And I can tell it would get confusing if you were the doorman or the footman, like seeing everybody all together at once. And especially when they haven't been together all that much, like they will start looking alike. And I think that's interesting. But it also goes to show that Simeon wasn't doesn't seem like he was as close with any of his children or any of his illegitimate children, because he had a couple of those too. What did you think of that? Um, so when I say family by extension, unintentional extension.
Yeah. So that was the clue that like was right in my face, right? Like Simeon Lee was a womanizer, his wife knew about it, didn't, he didn't care that she knew and this and that. And really that was front and center. And yeah, it was just it very much felt in that moment like a bravado thing versus like, hey, dummy, this is the major, major, major clue that you will need to solve this mystery.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah, and quite honestly, I didn't think it was Sugden Lee because he just ended up being the illegitimate son who posed as someone else to infiltrate himself into that family for revenge, or more so to avenge his mother, who was wronged yet again by Simeon Lee.
which was I knew the part because like they made a big emphasis about Simeon Lee, and he was very proud of this, like waiting 10 years to pounce and have his revenge, and that was kind of part of his character, and you could see that aspect in a lot of his sons, right? So I knew that was an important trait that would come back, but I didn't know where and how to place it in particular.
Yeah. And I think Agatha Christie did a good job of setting up like, oh, okay, we have physical attributes that are the same within all these children. Now we also have the establishing fact that he was a womanizer, he had many lovers, and he had many children. So it could be more than just his main children. It could be the other children that are also seeking his inheritance, which we didn't really think about because in the whole first act, we get just the main four children, so we're already thinking it has to be one of these four kids, and it's not. And I think that's fun because, like, again, when you add more characters, it's just like who the whole who done it.
Yeah.
So we get the whole explanation of the actual scene and how Sugden pulled it off with this makeshift toy balloon that would like lift the furniture on its own, and while he escaped through the window, and it also manually shut the door from inside while the door was locked, so it doesn't so it still was able to close the door, and all the things happen within a locked room. So what do you think of the practicality of that? Was that believable?
I mean, it's certainly diabolical, but yeah, I mean, I buy into it. Um, and yeah, I mean, it speaks to that idea that he really had this planned for many, many years. And, he's as Perot figures it out, he's in a neighboring town. And I forget the exact like clue of what that really meant. But but yeah, I mean, he knew this. The timing of him showing up for the report about the stolen diamonds was also key to all of this. And also, just kind of quickly, the thing that like threw it off for me, that Agatha Christie does so well is David Lee was speaking of Simeon's like whoring, let's say. He was so adamantly like vengeful of that. That's what made me think like, oh, I didn't think necessarily it was David himself. Although at times I probably did, but overall, just that vitriol of these people having such a hatred for what he did. It's like, oh, it can't
Mm-hmm.
be someone outside. It's like they all hate his guts. There's so much hatred within here. We don't need to go out of the circle.
Right. So, and it just makes you dislike Simeon Lee more because of how many people he wronged. It wasn't just his main family, it was his business partners, it was his lovers, it was his lovers' children. So, like, it's like you think it's one main circle, but no, there are like ripples of people that he affected and seemingly pissed off enough to get him killed. And you're like, okay, do we feel for his death? No, not really, because now we know that like he was just a big jerk. So again, he kind of had it coming. So a lot happened. A lot of people. It ended up being sucked in. Um, who set up this elaborate crime scene and stole the jewels to put into the garden to frame his main kids. So yeah, like again, diabolical, very thought out. I mean, like talk about a slow burn, and really taking the time to plan out this long, vengeful moment for his mother. But again, he was right in front of us, and it didn't think about him because he was the police. And I think it's just like it can't be the police; they're the ones who are trying to help it and figure everything out. So good
Yeah,
on you, Agatha Christie. Yeah, got me.
yeah. I mean, I think that, I mean, I don't know exactly what it was like at the time of the writing, but certainly the questioning of authority didn't really, like, film wise, like the 70s are kind of known for that because you had post Watergate and so forth. And that's like a big, at least in American film history, a big decade of just that cynicism. And so,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, it's just not a tradition, now, and in present day, like, yeah, people are very skeptical of police and their motives and things like that. But back in the day, it just seemed like a tradition of, like, you say hi to them and they keep you safe. Like that was the sort of seemingly outlook. I mean, I didn't live then, but that's what I get the vibe of.
Yeah, I definitely I liked how you brought up Watergate because the 70s and 80s, like that is when we're questioning our own authority and how many cover-ups there are and how many crimes are being covered up. And then I think fortunately we kind of got away from that, and it's been so long that now we're coming back to like, oh, maybe it is within. We do have crooked cops in that way, and we have crooked authority, bending all the rules around them. And I think it's good to read that because maybe it's just me. I'm just conditioned not to question the cops. They're the ones who are trying to figure everything out. And I didn't see it. I didn't see it, and I should have. And I think that's why I enjoyed it because it's so obvious yet not.
Yeah.
So a little bit about Agatha Christie, if you guys don't know. Wait, before we do that, is there anything else that I might have skipped over or
No,
you
I mean,
wanted to?
obviously, like, the only thing I might as well touch upon is the idea that, like, Simeon Lee was trying to change his will. I mean, he specifically called for on that night to, schedule an appointment to have the will eventually changed in like a day's time or whatever. So, that was another clue. And yeah, I'm glad ultimately, if anything, through this tragedy happened, at least his granddaughter found love, because that was another character of, like,
Right.
son of his partner, and like that's weird in and of itself. But then of course it turns out it's not really him, you know. So
Yeah.
yeah, and also it's not really his granddaughter because it's the girl that was sitting with the granddaughter going there. So, like, just a lot of, like, wait, what moments that had nothing to do with the murder, but still, like, all right,
Right.
let's hit on that for a moment because too much going on right here.
Right. Again, it's like people posing as each other, stealing someone else's identity just to get more money. And then like who had nothing to do with the family, but also that's just pure greed. And I think again with the like who a lot of them had their own motivations in their own way, and I think that was just like yet another thing, and we were like, oh, okay, so see, here's just another completely unrelated person who's also has a motivation to kill Simeon Lee. So I think it's fun, and it shows, and I think it's a nice balance with the women because yes, we have the four main sons, but then when we see a woman who also had an evil motivation, you're like, okay, so it's not just men. Like we gotta like cut out the sexism there. It's like it's both men and women in this story. It could be anybody.
And thank God, ultimately, she wasn't family because, man, they were
Yeah.
just they gotta meet some other women besides family members because I don't know what was happening with that.
I
Anyway.
know they all just need to sit down and have a family therapy session, talk through their shrink, and hash some things out. They just need to talk to each other. I think a lot of this could have been solved through communication. um, but yeah, I'm glad you brought that up
Oh,
too.
real quick, also
Thank
Harry
you.
and Alfred's dynamic, right? Like that was a key component of it, that their stories essentially matched up, which, you know, knowing that they're essentially mortal enemies, they wouldn't do, right? Like they wouldn't be in cahoots,
Mm,
would they? You know, it was like, which one is it? But that was a key component of it. And yeah, I enjoyed their dynamic.
right. And Harry's the one with the money issue, right? Yes.
So yeah, I mean, he's
Harry,
the
right.
wild child, roaming the earth, you know, do as he pleases type of stallion.
Yes, yes, yes. See, four men who like all completely different personalities, but it is hard to keep up with each of them and like what their purpose was. Yeah, big family and bigger family by extension. All right, so a little bit about Agatha Lee. She was born in Devon, England, and her mother actually encouraged her to write when she was younger. And then as she got older, she was in she joined, you know, World War I and World War II, and that's where she was and she took up nursing during the times of the war, and she actually increased like her knowledge of poisons. So that's why if you keep reading her stories, a lot of murders happen to deal with poisons and different arsenics and stuff, because she just like had this extra knowledge of poison. But fortunately, this story actually didn't deal with any poison. But her first one, the Mysterious Affairs of Styles, the death happened to be arsenic. So that's a recurring character or recurring theme within all of her murders as well. So she has a vast, expanse knowledge of poison. And then as she, you know, got older, she wrote more stories, and she's published over like 60 plus 70 plus different stories, some short, some long. And you know, so it has a lot of medical knowledge. And then including all the Hercule Poirot, she's also known for writing the Miss Jane Marple series. So now we have this female protagonist in that way. So like we have Poirot, we have Miss Marple, which is also like another famous TV, again with the mainstream. They made a TV series about that too. So Agatha Christie's been, or like her stories have been around and have been adapted into many different forms and different types of media within the last at least 30-40 years. So she's still relevant for sure.
And I appreciate like the fullness of her life, right? I mean, for anyone to publish the amount of books that she has is incredible in its own right. Um, but the fact that she was a nurse and kept that overall, and you know what I mean, like just an overall positive contribution to the world. I don't know, like yeah, it's just incredible to think about all the stuff that she did do, you know. So yeah.
Yeah, and I'm like, and what I enjoy about it is like she, yes, I mean, love Sir Conan Doyle, you know, Sherlock Holmes, but also I feel like Sherlock Holmes is also very heady. You could get lost really easily because it is so deductive reasoning, and there could be too many details. But I think the thing that I personally enjoy about Christie's writing is that it's actually easy to follow along. Like I might get lost here and there, but I'm not lost too much. Where I understand each story, I understand each character. Where I think Sherlock Holmes, you can get a little too confusing because it is so detailed, and if you blink once, you're gonna miss the entire thing. And
Yeah,
I
I
think
think for her,
Christie's easier to follow along.
yeah, I mean, you know, I think for me, it's a question of like, did I know what was underneath the surface at any given moment? And it's like, well, perhaps not. But as far as what was happening on the surface in any moment, that much I knew, right? So I think that is the difference. And you know, I don't know. To me, it's like for me, I've been ever since like I fell in love with Scooby Doo. I've been conditioned like just enjoy it, and they'll reveal to you, you know, who the culprit is, and that's the fun aspect of it is just enjoying the journey.
Right. I love Scooby Doo. I watched every episode as a child over and over again. So again, with the murder mystery in that sense, and not so much murder, but there were some deaths here and there in Scooby Doo. But like again, it's just the always trying to just figure out the whodunits, which is always fun, you know, because
Yeah.
it's always different. And so yeah, Christie, she's had like her works combined has sold more than 2 billion copies worldwide. She wrote 66 crime novels, story collections, 14 plays, 6 novels under the different name and pseudonym, and also for romance. So not just murder mystery, but she also has some romance stories out there, which I actually haven't read. So I should put that on my list. Yeah, but like very relevant and very still easy to follow along, and they're not timely either. They're timeless, because like this story was written in so the book background of this one first published in 1938. It didn't come to America to 1939. I mean, we've had wars, so many wars since, but you could read this now and like it wouldn't affect anything. So again, with the timeless aspect of all of her stories, you can read it at any time of the year and it's still relevant and easy to follow along. And there's been several adaptations of this particular story, mostly in the UK. There's been a radio story, there's been plays, there's been made for television movies, which I haven't read, or I mean I haven't watched any of them, but I'm actually curious to see like an English adaptation compared to what an American adaptation would be, to see if there's any difference.
Yeah,
Just the way we would
they're a lot
portray
more
it.
proper. And this feels like that tip, like in the story itself, there's a note about this feels very un-English. Which I thought was fun, because they're seemingly more proper and this and that. And yeah, I think like it lends itself well to be broken up. I mean, overall, the story takes place over the course of a few days, and so if you're, let's say, doing a radio drama and you want to stretch it out for 5 nights, then perfect. You have exactly what you need. You just break it up into that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, again, with the 3 act part, like it's definitely, you can definitely tell where you can like separate where to tell stories and who to show at what parts. And I like that. It's easy. And then so Agatha Christie wrote this in actually a response to her brother-in-law, James, who said that all of her stories were getting too refined and easy to follow along. And then she states, "You yearn for a good violent murder with lots of blood, so this is your special story written for you." Hence all the extra blood that we got with Simeon Lee. They're like, too much blood. Did you know there could be that much blood from it? One single man, which is, is an ode to Macbeth when, they killed him.
Yeah.
So I liked it. I like overall, I mean, I've assumed you read a few Agatha Christie books, but where does this stack within Christie for you?
I mean, I think I read 5, so it's definitely a top 5 book. Definitely have to kind of go down the rabbit hole. Part of it is like, like I've seen so many of the movies, especially like, the older ones, that like once you sort of know, I mean, there's dramatic irony in just kind of knowing where things are going to go and picking up on the clues. But yeah, I mean, so I'm trying to make more time to read more of hers. So it's tough, but I would definitely a top 5 since I've only read 5.
That's fair. I mean, that's pretty high on the list. Yeah, I've definitely been exposed to, Murder on the Orient Express, Death on the Nile, and Then There Were None. That's probably still my favorite one. The older versions, not the new ones that came out in the 2010s, 20s now. No, the classic ones, like now you guess you can say from the 70s, because I grew up with that thanks to my dad mostly. I grew up with those books and those movies, and definitely, so I was definitely exposed to Christie at a young age. Thankfully, so but I did enjoy this one. It's easy to read, and I've already passed this off to my dad. I told him to read it, and I think he'll thoroughly enjoy it. My friends, other people who are interested in murder mystery, I think would get a good read out of this one.
Yeah.
Um,
I read The Murder of Roger Ackroyd. Um, that one, yeah. And then There Were None is definitely one of my favorites.
yeah,
Murder
10
on,
Little Indians, of course.
um,
I have read The Mysterious Affairs of Styles, which is actually the first book of the Poirot series. Yeah, so
uh,
there's a good amount of her stuff out there. The ABC Murders, which they also made a TV series adaptation within the last few years as well.
wasn't
Um, I
Witness
watched
for the
that.
Prosecution based off of Agatha Christie? That's a
The
movie.
which the which one?
Witness for the Prosecution, or am I making that up? It feels
Oh,
like
maybe.
a Christie style. It's a movie, but I'm sure it's adapted from something. Let me look that up. Um,
Oh, quite possibly. I like honestly, I haven't heard of that one,
yes, it
so
is,
I wouldn't.
yeah, it's a short story by Agatha Christie that they turned into an amazing, amazing movie. Uh,
Okay.
I love
Yeah.
the prosecution as a movie. Anyway, yeah, there's a lot to love.
There's a lot. I mean, like, and even at the back of the book, like, there's a whole list of just the Perot books, and not including all the other Miss Marple and other ones. So yeah, overall, I thoroughly enjoyed it. Anything else about this book that you loved, that you didn't love?
And no, I mean, there was I enjoyed all of it overall. You know, it's just a fun, easy breeze. Like sometimes you need that, right? I think people put too much of an emphasis on like something being so heady and whatever, and it's like, nah, just have fun with it. Like books are meant to be enjoyed as well. Like
Right.
you know, so.
I think what helped with this book, why it was easy, because there's a lot of dialogue in it, and the dialogue was easy to follow in that sense because we're getting like a real time recount of these characters,
Oh,
and because there's so much dialogue, it's easy to get through the book.
she
It
definitely has
carries you.
style, and that's what makes her so adaptable. Is like, I mean, she didn't write screenplays, but like pretty much it's fairly easy to just translate what's there into a screenplay as opposed to like lamenting over it. Like, there's so many internal thoughts, and they'll say like,
Mhm.
like a lot of books sometimes, they'll have a paragraph of what happens, but it spans like 3 years or something like that. It's like this is pretty much happening in real time, as it's written. That's how it's happening. So that's what makes her very translatable.
Yeah, and I think this one could be easily translated into a play, one location, one family, easy, real time dialogue back and forth of what's happening in that one setting. Again, like I really enjoyed it. All right, so our next book for January 2023 is your choice. The Word for World is Forest by Ursula Guin.
Yeah, she's another powerhouse, and she's in the sci-fi realm, and I don't think she gets the credit that she deserves. Philip K. Dick and William Gibson and all these other people, Neil Stevenson now, and they get a lot of praise, but like Ursula Guin, she was a powerhouse, and fantasy as well. So like the Earthsea series. But this one overall is short. It's very thin, and yeah, it's less than 200 pages. Part of why I wanted to read it, because in a way, it feels, you know, emblematic of, let's say, a Fern Gully or an Avatar or something like that, where you have an alien race being colonized by humans. But I want to see kind of what she would do with that, and things of that nature. And so I'm halfway through. I'm enjoying it so far, and yeah, so that's what we got.
There we go. And then in February will be my choice again. They Both Die at the End by Adam Silvera. And I was just at Target a couple days ago, and I saw that there's now the prequel to this book. They Both Die at the End.
That starts.
Yeah. So I was like, oh, great. Now I'll probably have to read that too, in addition to our February choice. And then your choice again. Now we have locked in for March 2023, The World We Make by N.K. Jane Jemisin. Sorry, I totally messed that up. Jemisin.
Yeah.
What's that one about? I have never heard of it.
So it's subject to change, but it's a fantasy book. She's a fantasy author, and basically it's a story about where cities have avatars and they need, because of the crumbling world around us, the avatars need to save the cities and thus the world and humanity. So
I'm there.
Out there but fun, you know.
Right. Yeah, you had me at Avatar saving the world. I'm like, I'm there. Because like Avatar, Last Airbender, Legend Core, I'm all there. Like for leaders that have to save the world, I'm there.
Yeah,
Got me. Awesome. Well, I'm excited to read those books. So hopefully you guys can read along with us. Phil, where can everyone keep following you?
At Phil Svitek, very simple. Pretty much everywhere that social media exists currently, in the future, and perhaps in the past.
There you go. And you can follow me everywhere at Serafini TV. I hope everyone had a great Christmas, good New Year, good new 2023 year that's upon us. And thanks everybody for reading, watching, listening to us, and following along. We'll see you for our next book.